Thank you so much, Julie. And I'm particularly excited about this panel, partly because we have such amazing leaders here. Also, we're going to spend some time really talking about the significant place that service plays in our overall democracy. And, ways in which we can help strengthen the role that service plays and make it more central to American life. And so I just want to read off a few statistics first, and then I want to bring the panelists in. I would love for you all to just start by introducing yourselves. But before we get to that, just to share, according to AmeriCorps, an estimated 23.2% of Americans, or more than 60.7 million people, formally volunteered with organizations between September 2020 and 2021. In total, these volunteers served an estimated 4.1 billion hours with an economic value of $122.9 billion, right? So that's something we should be, right? And this was in the middle of COVID, too. IS reported the value of a volunteer hour to be $33.49 in 2023 through our value of volunteer time research. And finally, volunteering connects. We heard from Michael Smith a lot about bridge building and the role that volunteerism plays in that. Service is a way to combat social isolation also. We're hearing this more and more. Our Attorney General talks about the state of isolation and how it has adverse health impacts on Americans. And so there's a clear need to find ways to bridge and build social connections. So we wanted to bring some of these stats into the conversation before we turn to our esteemed panel. But Jennifer, let's start with you. A little bit about what do you do, and for the question, what significant place does service have in our social fabric and democracy?
Do you want us to introduce first?
Yes, introduce
and then
first.
we'll answer the question. Okay, great. Well, hello, everyone. First of all, thank you, Akilah and Brian, for hosting us. And I'm so honored to be here on the panel with my friends Carol and Koby. My name is Jennifer Sirangelo. I'm the CEO at Points of Light. We are a global leader in volunteering. You probably may remember our founder talking our founder, George H.W. Bush, in his inaugural address, talking about envisioning 1,000 points of light scattered throughout our country, serving others. And he was talking about volunteers and exactly what we're talking about here today. But I want to begin just like you did earlier today, Akilah, really quick. I just want to acknowledge we have 9 affiliate of our 140 affiliate organizations at Points of Light, our nonprofits. Of our 100 here in the United States, 9 of them are in the zone of our 2 hurricanes, both Helene and Milton. So from hands-on Suncoast to the Northwest Georgia Volunteer Center, in case anyone's watching, I just want to send out to those 9 organizations how thankful we are for them, and we hope everyone's safe and looking forward to their great work in those communities going forward. But as we think about, you asked a little bit about about the inspiration going forward. And I think for us, one thing I just want to note is we are at Points of Light, we're 35 years old. And my 2 favorite quotes about service, Brian mentioned the first one for me, and that is Martin Luther King's quote about all of us can be great because all of us can serve. And my second favorite quote is President Bush's, that any definition of a successful life needs to involve serving others. And you put those 2 things together, and I think that really encapsulates some of the leadership we've had in our country for service from the national stage. And I think just one of the unique things we offer, I think, for this movement is that legacy of presidential leadership. President Bush followed in the footsteps of other great presidents who inspired us to serve, from President Roosevelt founding the Civilian Conservation Corps to President Kennedy starting the Peace Corps. Then President Bush, H.W. Bush, led the way for the presidents that followed him, where President Clinton started AmeriCorps, President Bush started the Freedom Corps after 9/11. President Obama did the United We Serve campaign, and then President Biden just started our new Climate Corps. So we are really fortunate to have that level of presidential leadership, and we look forward to that going forward. And from our point of view, that's one of the essential elements that makes the U.S. different than many of the other countries around the world.
Thank you so much, Jennifer.
Hi, great to be here. Thank you for having me, and to my fellow panelists, and to all of you. Really appreciate you taking the time to be here, and your commitment to celebrating service, honoring service, and inspiring service. My name is Carol Spahn. I'm the director of the Peace Corps. Peace Corps has the very modest mission of building world peace and friendship. And we believe that that happens one relationship across difference at a time. And it happens by working side by side in countries around the world. We've been in 143 countries. We have 240,000 Americans who have served in the Peace Corps. We are currently in 61 countries, rebuilding after COVID. And it is really the essence of people-to-people diplomacy. So part of the question was about our social fabric and about democracy and about diplomacy. And I think I have the best job in federal government, because I get to talk with foreign leaders around the world, young people around the world, Americans of all ages who are serving in the Peace Corps and who are part of the magic that happens when people suspend themselves, truly suspend themselves, learn another language, learn another culture, and embed themselves in a community for 2 years. And I get to hear U.S. ambassadors talk about how important that is to U.S. diplomacy, because people in other countries know that not only does America care, but Americans care. And it is a lifetime connection that 2 years of service turns into a lifetime. One of my favorite quotes was from Tocqueville, when you talked about what significance does service have in our social fabric. He said, "I've seen Americans making great and sincere sacrifice for the key common good. And 100 times I have noticed that when needs be, they almost always gave each other faithful support." That was in 1835. So this is part of who we are. And even though it's hard to see sometimes when we're feeling despair over the great number of challenges we face, we have a can-do attitude here in America. And that is such a part of what defines us. And so some of the letters from foreign governments inviting Peace Corps in to help build civil society in countries where there is a tremendous youth population, where they are looking to inspire, it is that can-do attitude. It is that passion. It is that, like, let's join together and figure this out, no matter how messy it might be. We've got this. Yeah. And that's what I've seen again and again and again in the United States, whether it was the JFK call to action when 10,000 students showed up at 2 a.m., on the steps of the university, and he gave an impromptu speech really inspiring people to action. I think we need a call to action at that level right now, today, to bring us together around the 250th. I think it's a tremendous, tremendous marker. And I was joking with some folks this morning who are much younger than I am that I do remember the bicentennial. And it is a powerful moment. And I think we just have to seize it and lift up, and we can get past this period of divisiveness and polarization and come together not only across difference in the United States, but also across borders.
Thank you so much, Carol, for that inspirational message and reminding us that service is woven into the fabric of American society. So Koby, a little bit about the work that you do, and to our question, about the social fabric and democracy and the role that service plays in that.
Well, first, I want to say thank you for the opportunity to be here with this esteemed panel. Amazing leaders in the service space. I truly am honored to have the opportunity to be here with you. So I'm from the American Red Cross, Division Vice President, and of course, our mission is to alleviate human suffering in the face of emergencies through the generosity of our donors and our volunteers. You know, our work over the course of the years has really been centrally focused on enhancing and improving the ability of communities to become resilient and to respond to disasters and emergencies through the power of volunteerism. Yeah, and this concept and this idea is continually being challenged through a variety of different social ills and divisions that we have in our country. But I will tell you this: I just got back from Asheville in North Carolina. Was onboarding a couple of volunteers there. 3 teams of AmeriCorps NCCC were there. Now, I don't want to give away my age, but they look like they were in their teens. But they were highly motivated, highly energized. They came to serve these communities that they knew nothing about. They were all from Mississippi. Excuse me, one was from Utah, and the others were from teams were from Mississippi. And it just demonstrated to me in that moment, 3 days post-disaster, where thousands of people lost their homes and hundreds have lost their lives and potentially many more, that here are these young, national service-oriented youth who are willing to come in the midst, really, of a disaster recovery in order to serve their community members. And it reminded me of the power of volunteerism in that moment to create unity and bridging. And to the extent that we have the opportunity to talk about it today, this is one area where I think we do have the chance to recover the spirit of volunteerism and community service in our country. And I think we can do that through expansion of volunteer opportunities in extremely intense and in sometimes just simply transformative service opportunities.
Thank you so much for that, Koby, and thank you for the work that Red Cross is doing to be the emergency response for many families on the ground. Thank you so much. So, you know, we're talking a lot about volunteerism and service, but one of the things we have come to realize in the independent sector is that volunteerism creates one of the best pipelines into the nonprofit sector, right? So when we think about where many leaders in the nonprofit sector originated or how they got into the work, many of them started as volunteers. I know I did. And we see a lot of AmeriCorps, Peace Corps folks. So let's talk a little bit about that. Let's talk about how do we think service and volunteerism contribute to the American workforce and talent pipeline. And I use nonprofits, but we can actually look even wider than that. And so, Carol, let's start with you on this one. Thoughts?
Oh, I have so many thoughts about this because I also get to talk to a lot of employers who look for the kinds of skills that Peace Corps volunteers bring. But I want to point to a 2024 LinkedIn study that asked employers broadly what they are looking for, particularly in the age of AI. The #1 skill, adaptability. The other kinds of skills that made the top 10, communication, customer service, leadership, problem solving, all of the skills that when you are thrown into a situation that takes you far outside your comfort zone without the resources that you might typically have, you have to get creative. You have to learn to think on your feet. You have to be a self-starter. All skills that employers are looking for. But the one that struck me most was from someone in the biotech industry, high tech. And he said, I look specifically for people who have served in the Peace Corps. And I said, well, that doesn't make any sense because they are often out in rural communities in the middle of nowhere without access to electricity. So they are most certainly not keeping up with the latest technology. Talk to me, tell me more. And he said, what we are about is trial, quick failure, and turn around and try something new. Peace Corps volunteers know how to fail. It does not throw them off. They accept it, they own it, they move on, and they try something new. And that kind of innovation and creativity is what we need. And that really struck me. And throughout the federal government, whether it is FEMA, State Department, USAID, DOE, all of them, there is a long line of agencies looking for Peace Corps volunteers for similar reasons, because of their willingness to stretch and grow and adapt as needed.
Their resilience. Very, very good. So let me bring in our other panelist. Jennifer, Koby, thoughts on this one?
Well, I'll just tell a quick personal story, if that's okay, Akilah.
Absolutely.
So, I'm an example of service inspiring a career. I grew up in Kansas City, Missouri, and don't get mad at us about our teams right now. Yes, go Chiefs. But I grew up in a family where I had to work during college. I didn't have the luxury of taking trips during spring break or during Christmas time or the holidays. And one year, I was in college during the time of the spawn of this service movement that we know today, the beginning of having Habitat chapters on campus, things like that. And I got a scholarship one time for travel to be able to go to Guatemala to help build houses with Habitat for Humanity. And it was that experience meeting people who worked for Habitat. I had done a lot of volunteer work through my church and other things, but I didn't know there were jobs, that was a career path. I never knew until I saw someone that was doing that job. And that changed my life. And I never looked back. I never looked for any other kind of work. And I personally believe that's one of the reasons I'm here today, leading an organization, inspiring people to volunteer. Very proud that at Points of Light, we recognize and do storytelling around volunteering. And that's so important. I think President Bush knew that. And that's why he started the Daily Point of Light Award. You may not know that Daily Point of Light wasn't just a phrase, it was a recognition program. He recognized one everyday American from the White House during his tenure. He recognized 1,000 Americans. We've kept that going every day since he was in the White House, and we're now at 7,900 stories of everyday Americans making a difference in their communities so that everyone can see themselves and be inspired by others to serve. And that's one of the things I hope we can bring to this coalition is some of that storytelling. And I will say I'm personally one of those that benefited from that kind of seeing who you want to be. And that's why I believe in service. And one little fun fact is 50% of the people we recognize as a Daily Point of Light are young people under 18 who are social entrepreneurs. They have seen a need in their community and they have created an organization or a movement to solve the problem. And that's the kind of ingenuity we have in the United States. That's the kind of stories about young people that we can be telling. And they aren't waiting to get a job. They're creating. They're just like you and your friends, Akilah, not waiting, but they're ready to serve now. And if we don't hire them, they're going to create it themselves.
That's right. Koby, please.
Yeah, so I agree with this completely. Particularly the attributes around leadership. The American Red Cross is about 20,000 employees, 300,000 volunteers. I intentionally look for people that have served in national service, AmeriCorps members who actually just signed an agreement with Michael Smith 6 months ago to be an employer of choice for national service. I'm looking for those type of people in our organization. I'm also looking for military veterans. And the question is, what is it about, national service participants or people that commit, a year or half a year, even a quarter of a year to serving their communities? What is it about these people or people that volunteer to serve in the military and raise their hand and go work in austere environments around the globe or in Peace Corps? What is it? Well, it's three things. One, it's resilience for sure. I agree with you there, absolutely. You have to become both mentally and physically resilient in many different ways in order to work through the challenges that you've been presented in these service opportunities. It requires leadership because oftentimes it's a small team, and the small team is usually looking for and seeking very specific direction and leadership and guidance, so everybody gets a chance to lead in a lot of these service opportunities. And then lastly, I would say the most important attribute for any employer, I personally think, and maybe other employers here will agree, ability to work with other people, teamwork. Some of the biggest human resources challenges we have as employers is in finding people that can actually work together.
That's right.
Yeah. So these are important attributes of national service and volunteerism and working in organizations like the military that push you to exhibit these attributes, but also to grow them, that make you exceptional employees.
So one thing that I heard is that in a lot of ways, volunteerism helps to expose you even to different types of jobs. I don't know about you all, but when I was growing up, and I grew up in a working class family in New York, the list of jobs that your parents told you can be wasn't that long. It wasn't that extensive. But when I started volunteering and, now you can see, oh, I didn't realize I can be a COO, or I could develop programs all my life, or I can go help communities that have just went through a natural disaster. Like you didn't even know these were possibilities until you started to see them and volunteer. So, well, one of the challenges we hear a lot today in terms of volunteering is how do we get people involved, right? So we have heard, we've seen the volunteer numbers slump a little bit during COVID. We're all challenged with getting more and more volunteers for our organizations. I think Congressman Beard talked about military service and where those numbers are, how they didn't meet their goals this year. And I, even know AmeriCorps, Peace Corps, we're struggling to get Americans to volunteer. What's stopping them? What are some of the barriers? Koby, let's start with you first.
So this is a real serious issue,
Yeah.
and I do want us to pause for a moment and think what this means for the future of our country. During COVID-19, the American Red Cross lost approximately 50% of our volunteers. So we went from about 300,000 to 150,000. We're still rebuilding that volunteer workforce, but volunteerism as a culture does so much for the mental health of our population. It does so much to reduce polarization, civic and division and hate. John Gompertz and David Eisner wrote a really interesting paper about a month ago that talked about the impact of volunteerism on reducing social isolationism, polarization, and hate. There's social science around the shoulder-to-shoulder volunteerism that lets you actually see each other as human beings,
right.
That can have a dramatic impact on some of the civil discord that's happening today in America and will continue to happen unless we grow volunteerism in order to heal our country. It's critically important that we grow volunteerism, not just because of the work that the people do on an everyday basis, but because it can unify our country. I think that call to action in particular may be a way to encourage more everyday Americans and other people around the world to give their time, their energy, and their effort to help heal this nation. I think the pitch, the call to action matters. People want to do something with their lives, and in particular with their volunteer time that's meaningful and impactful. I can't think of anything more meaningful or impactful right now than healing our country.
Thank you. And Koby, if I can just, so pitch is one of the things you said, hey, we need to do a better job at pitching why we need people to volunteer and all of the intrinsic benefits. What are some of the challenges that are stopping Americans right now, though? And not just Koby, but I wanted to pick up on this, but please.
Well, I can, from our studies of volunteerism at Points of Light, there's a number. It's actually, I agree with you that this is a very serious issue. If not, I agree with everything that's been said here about the isolation issues and certainly polarization and the need for bridging. The third reason I would say this is critical right now is the needs of our nonprofit organizations. At Points of Light, our 100 affiliates in the U.S. touch over 52,000 and supply volunteers to 52,000 nonprofit organizations. 1/3 of the U.S. nonprofit workforce is volunteers, and 2/3 of them are telling us they can't recruit enough volunteers, and 1/3 of them at the same time are saying their funding's going down. So this is not just, isn't it great to add on to do volunteer? This is the critical work. I used to be the CEO of 4-H. We had a volunteer workforce of 600,000 and a paid workforce of 3,000. and that's what you're saying at American Red Cross. Sometimes it's much more than 1/3. So this is a really critical issue. There are, from our research shows that there are multiple barriers. Some of the basics that are really challenging right now, especially we see this through our corporate partners. We have about 200 of the Fortune 1000 that work with us on their employee volunteering. Even there, where there is paid time off, they're struggling to get folks out to volunteer, even where there's paid time off. So there's definitely a cultural norm of kind of hunkering down. We drilled that into people for 3 years. So there is a psychosocial here. A second one is the number one reason people volunteer is because someone asked. So if you're not out volunteering, there's not that multiplier factor if I'm inviting you to come. So that's one of our barriers. And then we have the real barriers of resource. So it's my time resource. I don't know where to go. I can't, like for me, as I mentioned my story, I couldn't take the time off. I had to work in college to pay for my bills. So I didn't have that luxury until I got help, a scholarship. So I think those are what we see as, you asked specifically, what are the barriers? I see many solutions coming. We see them. We see significant increases in corporate volunteer paid time off. We see increasing volunteering through companies. Their jobs is increasing, that our employers are getting better. But there's significant barriers. In addition, last thing is around our Gen Z and Gen Alpha. Their definitions of volunteering are different than what our systems are designed to collect. So they see volunteering as protesting, as activism, as I'm online promoting this, I'm following these people, I'm building their influence, and we don't collect that. So at Points of Light, we're thinking about the future, how we build an infrastructure that includes them and includes what they believe in volunteer. So I think we need to change, as well as some of these barriers. We need to work together to reduce them for folks.
Yeah, no, this is really good. Carol.
Yeah, I'd like to build on what both of my esteemed colleagues have said. I think the psychosocial impact of COVID is something we still don't understand. I think it's still evolving. People turned inward. They got very comfortable in a small pod. They got very comfortable behind a screen. Does it mean that they're not out there doing things for their neighbors and their community? Absolutely not. But it's not happening through formal structures. Trust in institutions is way down. And there is a lot behind that that is going to be hard to overcome. And, you know, to your point about sort of how people think about volunteerism, I think activism is something different. It's important, it matters, but it is very different than getting out there and rolling up your sleeves and getting into the action so that you understand the nuance and the complexity of what's happening, as opposed to staying high policy level. And I think we have to find ways to be more flexible in our offerings and how we bring people in so that they are able to maybe put their toe in the water and, you know, eventually start to get more engaged. But there was a period of tremendous uncertainty, a global shock, the likes of which none of us have seen in our lifetimes. And we're only a couple years out of that. And I've referred to this so often as a liminal moment where everything you knew previously was disrupted. And we're starting to come out of it, but I do fear that we're coming out of it in a place where we're conflating comfort with wellness. And they're not the same thing. Wellness means growth. It means that you are out challenging yourself and making mistakes, and it's a little uncomfortable. And I think it's going to take time for people to rebuild their resilience coming out of a time that was traumatic to each and every person in every country around the world. And that's just the reality. So when I think about it, I think about how we can create the safety nets and the structures to give people the confidence to get out and do things that feel scary after a time of such uncertainty. And that's a challenge for all of us. And I think it's extraordinarily important that we don't get stuck in this place where we are right now.
Akilah, I just want to say one more thing. And Carol, I think your insights are really spot on. And when I think about my niece who's 18, 19 here, she's here in Washington at GW, and she is used to frictionless everything, right? Frictionless Amazon, frictionless school, everything, Uber, yeah, don't even have to walk out to get my food. It's like crazy. And I think about, I'll be honest, I'm going to put this on Points of Light and others like us. It is not frictionless to volunteer today. It is not. And it's not that we need to make it that easy, because I think your point's really well taken, Carol, and I think I'm going to be thinking about that, about the comfort isn't wellness, and we need to think about what that looks like, I think, in volunteering. But I just want to, there's so many cultural things that we are not yet, I believe, our volunteering infrastructure, it has not kept up with the way people activate, the way we live today, to be honest. I'm kind of shocked sometimes that we have as many volunteers as we have. At least in 4-H, where I was, they had to fill out the pack of paper. It was so much, and then you had to go to these trainings, and it's a lot. And we're gonna have to adapt, and that's what we're looking at is our affiliates that are really doing a great job of that. How do we scale that? So I don't know, Koby, I'm sure you have with Red Cross.
Yeah, please.
No, this is exactly correct. So our systems in organizations, now we're dynamic. I think personally, I think we're pretty dynamic, but we are a 161-year-old global confederated nonprofit organization, right? And so our systems aren't necessarily as quickly adaptable to the new volunteer needs of this generation. So right now, as we sit here today, there's 20,000 people that are sitting in the queue waiting to volunteer in order to support Hurricane Helene in the American Red Cross, right? And we're working through those applications and through those processes to get them on the ground to help these people who really need our help. We have the opportunity to put people to work in the way they want to get put to work, but you have to be quick. And you have to meet the needs that are defined by that particular volunteer at that particular point in time, or they're on to something else, or to your point, they're back in their commuter, behind their computer in the comfort zone, right? So being able to actualize in near real time to put volunteers to work in ways that are meaningful and impactful to them, you've got a very narrow window in order to do it, and our systems have to be adaptable and engaging enough in order to provide those opportunities.
So no, this is, and I invite you all to continue to lean in because we get this question all the time. Mm-hmm. How have we shifted, especially post-COVID, around volunteering? When I thought about volunteering, I think about going to do something for someone else, and I don't necessarily get like a direct benefit from it. I get an intrinsic one. So every year at Independent Sector, we go and we volunteer at a local nonprofit. One of our members last year, we did a local soup kitchen, and we all just went. I brought my kids to volunteer, and that's just what you do. You just sort of do that, as opposed to this comfort volunteering or advocacy, which I think is different. I think it's important. It's part of our responsibility as civic participants in our democracy, but that's a little different because there is, at the end of the day, something in it for you. So it's really interesting how we've made that distinction, and so people are really interested in sort of how we've seen COVID sort of shift. What are sort of the cultural shifts we've seen in the collective around sort of giving and volunteerism? And do we think even issues such as political partisanship have played a role in volunteerism?
Yeah, well, one thing I wanted to just share about what Peace Corps has done and is doing, and Peace Corps is unique because we require a 27-month commitment for our traditional 2-year program. So we put people through 3 months of training in language and culture, and then they go out and live at the level of the community for 2 years. It is incredibly powerful, the best thing you can ever do. Everyone I've ever met who did it said it was the best thing they've ever done. Encourage you all to do it. There is no age limit. And, but during COVID, we had countries that said, what can you do for us virtually? And, government of Botswana wanted support with a social media campaign around COVID. And so we stood up that program. And you can imagine we can now provide expertise, very targeted expertise, 5 to 15 hours a week. We're active in 50 countries around the world, including in Ukraine, where we were never previously able to have volunteers or be active in a war zone. But now we can through it's a virtual pilot program. But you can imagine, as you get really creative, you could have professors who take sabbatical. You could have people, teachers on their summer break who go and serve for 3 months in person, and then they support virtually curriculum development throughout the year. And, we're trying to come up with more flexible models so that more people can engage and can see themselves in it, while at the same time being true to what our host country partners are looking for. And, so it's very, very dynamic. And for large scale programs like the Peace Corps, you can't get too individualized, right? But we can get more creative.
It's exciting. I love what Carol's doing. I just wanted to think a little bit about, Akilah, you asked us, one of the questions you asked us to think about was the future. And we do see some real bright spots. And a couple of the things, given what we've talked about here, some of the things I just wanted to mention are things like, we talked about some of the barriers, but some of them are accessibility and people's time. So one of the things a number of our affiliates are leaning into is family volunteering. So you're not having to take time away as an adult, but you're doing that together and you're fostering that.
That's
and
great.
like you did with your kids. But that hasn't always been how our traditional volunteer centers did it. And so we've been building that up. It's something we've been doing for a long time, but a number of we're seeing more growth in that area. We are going to be at Points of Light, focusing more on that, especially with the 250th as a part of America Gives, which Rosie's going to talk about. Another thing that I wanted to bring up is the concept of community-centered volunteering. This is, for us, that meaningful work that you've both been talking about, even in our domestic work that may not be 27 months, but how can we infuse that element of understanding the need, the culture that really has the community being a part of the solution, that the volunteer is more a facilitator of the solution than I'm the one bringing the solution. That meaning and purpose is so much more attractive to especially the next generation, that we are building that into many of our new volunteer opportunities. But that's the way of the future for volunteering, at least here domestically in the United States. The last thing is, I do not know what this means yet, but we have to deploy, I believe, in the volunteer matching, preparing. Our mission at Points of Light is to inspire, equip, and mobilize people to take action that changes the world. And anyway, as I mentioned before, we have got to deploy AI to do that faster, the way Koby says. What that looks like, how that looks like, what coalition of us gets together to solve that problem, that's a big need that we have, that we are leaning into and talking to some tech partners about, but that's got to be a part of the future. And I'm excited about it. I think we can do it, and it's another way we will lead in the world in mobilizing. We'll be taking our technology leadership and applying that to service leadership.
Wonderful. Please, Koby.
Thanks. So you asked about political division, and the American Red Cross, independence and neutrality are part of our fundamental principles, as are many other global organizations. So it can't, right? So politics can't interfere in the delivery of humanitarian aid. It absolutely cannot. There are already enough barriers. There are already enough barriers to people serving. And one of the more interesting service models that I've seen more recently actually tackles that head on. A gentleman by the name of David McCullough with the American Exchange Project is, with intentionality, putting together high school students from different socio-political and demographic backgrounds and having them exchange experiences. Somebody from New York goes to middle Nebraska, and they spend time together. And it's the tension and the uncomfortableness and the uncertainty of that travel, that kid going alone into a new community, a new family to learn about that family. And some of the initial social science research is showing us that has the power and the impact of increasing propensity to volunteer for that youth, as well as decreasing the otherism, which can prevent people from volunteering. Those 20,000 people that are going to be volunteering for us in the American Red Cross and this response and many, many others, they weren't asked what their political affiliation was. They weren't asked, what their socio-political beliefs are. What they were asked were, can you help? And that's the sort of volunteers that we need.
I love that. So, we're lucky we have a little bit of time left here. So if you can indulge me, who's missing from volunteering? I mean, one of the great things about volunteering is that people can do it from very young to very mature, right? And so in fact, seniors over the age 55 and older are some of the largest sort of swaths of volunteers we're seeing next to young people. But who's missing in your respective sort of demographic? I mean, age is just one thing, but when you think about other ways that people think about their identities, gender, race, geography, stage of life. So who's missing?
Well, I can say from Peace Corps' perspective, and again, we've got a very unique model. We tend to get people who are, directly out of undergrad or in the 50-plus category. And I think there's a whole swath of people who are going through sort of midlife changes in what they want to do in new directions. And I think it's a really powerful opportunity to retool and take your life in a new direction. But I think the biggest barrier to service in something like Peace Corps is socioeconomic. It is a significant time commitment. I think student loan debt burden is significant, and even though the pathway to new professional opportunities is so clear, to me, there is, a perception that you're losing or giving up on or falling behind. And to take that risk when you don't have, again, a safety net back here in the United States is a lot to ask.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think for us and for many volunteer organizations, it's the same answer. It's the folks that are right in the middle, early to mid swim work life, right? Folks that are in that bucket, they just don't have the time. They're raising their kids, they're getting college funds ready, they're working, their 9-to-5 jobs. That's the group that's missing. And that's most of America, quite frankly, yeah? That's a group that's missing. I think one of the things that we can do is we can continue to challenge organizations to make volunteering for those people easier. Tax incentives, ensuring that employers give their employees time off to volunteer, pay time off to volunteer, encouraging assignments that are complementary to their work-life goals and aspirations. There's a lot of things that we can do to pull out the middle work-life America and put them into work.
Thank you.
Now, I would just like to add that I think what Carol said is what we found in our research and through our affiliate, Global Affiliate Network, is socioeconomic. And in many countries, including here in the United States, that translates into Black and brown communities not having as many opportunities to serve with time. And to me, that it's all a part of that same trajectory of the demographics that tell us there are greater barriers for Black and brown communities in their health, in their mental health, a number of and I think volunteering is a part of that. So that's one of the reasons at Points of Light we are embracing a community-centered volunteering model where everyone can see that they can volunteer. They see people like them volunteering and leading the volunteering. And for us, it's a lot of change. It's a lot of new thinking, but it's necessary. And we see our nonprofits that are are centering on that are seeing very good results in their community for diversification of volunteers and the volunteer leadership.
That's wonderful. As America becomes more diverse, it is important to make sure that our volunteer base represents the true diversity of America. So thank you for that. So we will be celebrating 250 years in the next year and a half. What does the next 250 years look like, and how do we get there in terms of volunteerism and service?
So for one, we need way more people volunteering.
That's right.
That's for sure.
More.
That's for sure. And I say that because of the challenges that we're facing, right? You know, whether it be the increase in behavioral health challenges that we have, the mental health crisis that we have in America, whether it be responding to unprecedented billion-dollar disasters, 28 last year, there'll be at least that many this year, adjusted for inflation, the most billion-dollar disasters in our history, responding to civic discord, you know, and improving the work life of our workforce. All volunteerism contributes to all of these things. So we need volunteers in order to have a healthy social ecosystem in America. So it's got to grow. It's got to grow significantly. In 2016, General Stanley Crystal made a challenge to recruit at least 1 million new national service participants. That won't nearly get us there. Bill Basil, I see you sitting back there. That won't nearly get us there. We need a plurality of Americans that believe that spending time in serving their community members, their neighbors, is not just important, but it's a part of the American experience.
Go next. So first of all, 250 years is a very, very long time. So I just want to say that because I was looking back at the pace of change. So from the time when the television was invented to the internet coming online was 62 years. Now we're streaming. Now we've got AI, like things we just couldn't have even fathomed. I mean, I served as a Peace Corps volunteer before the internet. And when I say that, you know, the newer groups just like look at me with the biggest eyes, and I'm not that old. Getting there, but not that old. So I can't imagine with that pace of change, you know, what will be facing us, but we know there will be challenges because there are always challenges, and human ingenuity and, you know, coming together, we rise to meet those challenges because necessity is the mother of invention. So as I think about the next 250 years, I think about how big can we dream? And I think about sustainable development goals when they said we want to cut the rate of extreme poverty in half. That is outrageous. Yeah, it's happening, right? We've reached epidemic control with HIV and AIDS in 13 countries, some of the poorest countries in the world, because we dreamed we could do it. And tens of thousands of people came together, from researchers to volunteers to doctors to policymakers, to make it happen. So as I think about the next 250 years, I think about let's dream as big as possible, and people will come forward. They want to be a part of it, and we can do that. We've just got to make the dream big enough and invite people in ways that they can see themselves and be a part of the solution.
Well, my vision for, 250 years from now, I do agree with Carol, it's going to be totally different. We won't even know what it looks like, and I'm very excited for what that will be for our country. But I hope that a part of that, our vision would be that volunteering, Koby, you kind of said it, but I just want to reiterate it, is that volunteering isn't just considered something that's nice to do, but that it is, an essential part of, being either, I don't want to even use the word citizen, just being a member, belonging to the community. That it is not seen as extra. It's not seen as, oh, aren't you so great that you're doing that? It's something that's basic. Of course we're doing that. That's a culture change. So I envision a culture change. I think that's actually why President Bush used the bully pulpit of the White House. He envisioned something. He decided to recognize everyday Americans every day from the White House. And some of the cool stories about that are every time he would fly on Air Force One, he'd land on the tarmac. His advance people would make sure those points of light were standing there. He'd shake their hand before he even started his presidential business. We need that level of commitment from all kinds of leaders, where it's not just CEO recognizes service once a year at their corporate party, but how are they recognizing it every day, all the time? Is it a part of your performance review? I mean, there's so many systemic things we could build in that make this a culture change. And I'm excited to dream with a group like this, about how we can make that happen. But a culture change is my vision.
Well, I want to really thank the panel again for your sage insights. And again, this is an important topic to all of us, and really appreciated how you were able to articulate some of the toughest challenges the sector is facing, but also hope, and also a vision for the future of service and volunteerism in America. So with that, we will conclude the panel, and thank you again, panelists.
Thank you.